former workers maintain a 48-hour strike in protest against the mining company Chinalco due to labor abuses. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel denounced the United States' migration policy towards Cuba and described it as a destabilizing tactic against the island. Zimbabweans cast ballots on Saturday in parliamentary and local authorities by-elections, seen as a yardstick of what is to come in next year's general polls. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin. From the teleSUR studios in Havana, we begin with the news. In Peru, former workers maintain a 48-hour strike in protest against the mining company Chinalco due to labor abuses. The protesters blocked roads in the province of Huancayo and the department of Junín and denounced the dismissal of at least 1,000 workers as well as a breach of DAA commitments and the violation of labor laws. They claimed that the company did not respond to their initiative to establish a dialogue and listed the mining company's unfulfilled commitments in terms of sustainable development and environmental care, signed in acts and agreements. They demanded that Chinalco put an end to its abuses, respect Peruvian laws, and not generate social conflict. And in Brazil, former President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva greeted social movement supports and criticized Bolsonaro's government on food security issue. Da Silva greeted members of the homeless workers movement for its support and criticized the current government of Jair Bolsonaro, who he will likely face in the upcoming presidential elections later this year. At an event at a public housing that the former president built when he led the country from 2003 to 2011, Da Silva stressed the progress made during his previous term in office regarding food security and promised to lead a social, responsible government, although he will not formally announce his candidacy until April. Polls show the former Workers' Party leader with a wide advantage, almost half of the vote, according to an IPEC poll released.
Carrying to eat, grabbing bowls to eat. We have seen 19 million people go hungry and more than 112 million people with some kind of food insecurity. This country is the third biggest food producer globally and the first animal protein producer on earth. There is no explanation for having people go hungry in this country. We had ended the hunger in this country, which the United Nations recognized.
And the National Bolivarian Armed Forces of Venezuela destroyed a paramilitary camp used to create explosives in the border state of Apure. The strategic operational commander of the Venezuelan Armed Forces, Domingo Hernandez, announced the operation was carried out during patrol and search activities in the sector of La Coromoto in that region bordering Colombia. On his Twitter account, Hernandez detailed that among the confiscated materials were more than 10,000 non-electric detonators, 4,500 white phosphorus munitions, and 1,250 kilograms of black powder. These actions are part of the Bolivarian Shield 2022 operation aimed at eliminating armed drug trafficking terrorists from Colombia who operate near or in the country. Venezuela's Minister of Public Works and Services, Néstor Reverol, announced that a new attack against the national electricity system has been neutralized. Reverol informed that officials of the National Electric Corporation prevented Friday a new sabotage attempt in the thermoelectric complex General Rafael Urdaneta, located in the western state of Zulia. The workers of the state corporation were deployed for the preventive evaluation of the facility, on which depends a good part of the region's electricity supply. Venezuela has been the victim of systematic attacks on its electric system since 2019, with important consequences for the nation's economy. The 502 sanctions imposed by the United States against Venezuela asphyxiated its economy for 6 years. The 55% of the public finances were affected, among them the main pillar of the country, the oil industry. The nation had to learn to diversify its production and is recovering. The story here with Madeline Garcia.
The shortages are now behind. The big supermarket chains are showing another face. The stands are full of products that more than a year ago were difficult to get. It is a recent history, and it is that illegal economic sanctions of the United States attacked the income of the country that has imported almost everything. Now the national production of the main food items is a priority, and the nation is self-sufficient.
You can see it in the markets. Before you go into a supermarket, and there would be few people, little movement. Now you see the influx of all these businesses. You go downtown and you can't even walk. I mean, the economy, the money is moving.
The private sector depended on the dollars from the oil income that it stopped receiving due to the blockade imposed on Venezuela to make its economy quick, just as Washington's spokesman said. So businessmen reinvented themselves. 100% of the imports today fall on their shoulders, leaving their dependence on oil. New establishments were born. This is vital. Considered the biggest pharmacy in Latin America. Everywhere you can see messages of overcoming, of betting on the country, on life.
The dream is for Venezuela. We as Venezuelans firmly believe that we are on the right path, and we are looking for the opportunity to show the world that in Venezuela wonderful things like this can be done.
Its extension is as large as the number of Venezuelans who come to look for medicines that disappear because of the blockade, like food. They are already on the stands. More than 40,000 Venezuelans died because of the measures violating the human rights of the United States and its allies. This image means a victory. The hardest moments are over. Vice President TeleSUR Rodriguez made an X-ray of what was overcome and what was the damage caused by the economic war, that even though it continues, the country is advancing gradually. They were still very hard months, as we are still in the year 2020, but in the month of July 2021, an inflection in the democratic history of Venezuela would take place of an economy that was criminally hit by the blockade against our country. Venezuela takes advantage of this tribune to reject any form of economic aggression, any type of illegal sanction, unilateral coercive measures that attempt against the rights of our people. The country's vice president denounced behind these sanctions there is a criminal industry. The blockade represents 25% of the cost of oil, and once payment is received so that this money reaches Venezuela, up to 15% is cancelled for transactions. That impacts the economy at all levels.
teleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this. Hi, and welcome back to From the South. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel denounced the United States' migration policy towards Cuba and described it as a destabilizing tactic against the island. Díaz-Canel said that with these actions, Washington stimulates irregular migration as part of its destabilizing policies. In addition to it, will use the Cuban people in its hegemonic and hostile positions against Havana. The president also accused the White House for deliberately failing to comply with bilateral commitments and for imposing burdens on transit nations to the U.S. territory. Alba TCP Executive Secretary Sacha Llorenti concluded his official agenda in Havana with a visit to the Fidel Castro Ruz Center after an intense week of activities that included a meeting with President Miguel Díaz-Canel and other authorities of the island. At the end of his visit to the Fidel Castro Ruz Center, the Executive Secretary of Alba TCP told the media that the alliance is in a process of revitalization and rebirth of several programs in sectors such as agriculture, sciences, technology, education, and health. He also explained that despite the pandemic and the blockade imposed by the United States on Cuba and Venezuela, the alliance is stronger and more alive than ever. Llorenti said he was moved by what he saw at the Fidel Castro Ruz Center and recalled that Chavez and Fidel were the intellectual and material authors of Alba.
We are in the process of revitalizing our alliance and relaunching several programs in different fields, not only in the productive areas such as agriculture or the manufacture of medicines within the Alba countries, but also in sports, culture, science and technology, education and health, so that we can resume these types of projects now.
In the United Kingdom, Home Secretary Priti Patel revealed that her government is ready to toughen repressive measures against Russia after a conversation with Russian pranksters posing as Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. The Russian pranksters, known as Vovan and Lexus, published a full video of the virtual conversation where the Minister of the Interior confesses that, in view of the crisis in Ukraine, her country is considering anti-Russian measures, including the deprivation of basic rights for Russian citizens. At the same time, Patel assured that London is considering pushing for Russia's expulsion from important multilateral organizations. The minister also stated that the British authorities have no concerns about the possible entry into the United Kingdom of militants from nationalist groups posing as refugees, while repeating at the request of the Russian jokers, an expression used by neo-Nazi groups at the end of the interview. While talking about the approach from the Western media to the current situation and what they would say in their platforms about the reality there, in that regard, Bartlett also gave her opinions.
What I think they will say is, well, for example, we saw it ourselves yesterday in the area that was liberated, and there's a hospital that was attacked, but what they will say is they will not give any context as to why the hospital has been destroyed. And that context is that it was militarized by the Ukrainian forces. Were it not militarized, it would not have been a target, But they almost certainly will just report that, Russia destroyed a hospital. They will probably add for some spice that there were people inside the hospital, which is not true. If it's a militarized headquarters, there's not going to be civilians in there.
According to Ava Bartlett, journalists should go there and report on the liberation of the Donetsk and Luhansk new republics. She also expressed that what the peoples of the Donbass region have suffered over the last 8 years under Ukrainian shelling must be known worldwide.
I think it's disgusting. We're here to report on both on the liberation of these areas, but also on the suffering these people have endured. In Donetsk and Lugansk, under 8 years of Ukrainian shelling with heavy artillery, day and night. We have at least 14,000 people killed. It could be upwards of 20, I've heard some estimates. So that's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about the fact that almost 2 weeks ago, in the hub of Donetsk, there was a Ukrainian Tochka-U missile, which had, I'm not a military expert, but it had cluster munitions, essentially. And were the whole thing to have detonated in the middle of Donetsk, there would have been more than the 21 civilians that were killed and the 37 that were injured, including amputations of limbs, These are the things journalists should be talking about, not how hard it is for them to get into the area.
And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz described as very positive the European energy policy agreed upon at the recently concluded European Union summit in Brussels. The German statesman said at a press conference after the summit that there is a voluntary opportunity to cooperate when it comes to gas purchases, and that in his point of view, it was important that Germany and other countries be skeptical when it comes to market interventions. Scholz also warned that Spain and Portugal are in a special situation and need careful considerations. We have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us. Hi and welcome back. Zimbabweans cast ballots on Saturday in parliamentary and local authorities by-elections seen as a yardstick of what is to come in next year's general polls. The polls, which opened at 7 a.m. local time, generated so much interest that President Emmerson Mnangagwa led various campaign rallies to shore up support for ruling ZANU-PF candidates. Opposition leader Nelson Chamisa, who is seen as the most formidable challenger to Mnangagwa, formed a new party citizens coalition for change 3 months before the by-elections. Voters are casting ballots in 28 parliamentary constituencies, including 20 where opposition lawmakers were recalled in a battle over the control of the country's largest opposition party. The rest of the seats fell vacant following the deaths or reassignment of the incumbents.
I came to vote because we want change. Things are hard in this country. There's no money and jobs, and our children are not going to school.
Members of Sadr government movement gathered in Iraq's parliament on Saturday to vote for their approved candidate for president of the republic amid disagreements and boycotts by several parliament parties. Sadr movement lawmakers arrived to the parliament building in Baghdad, donning white shrouds Muslims used to wrap their dead in a sign of their willingness to die for him. Iraqi politicians have so far failed to agree on a compromise candidate for the country's top post. The failure to elect a president reflects the deep divisions among Iraq's political factions that have only grown since the October 10th parliament elections, whose results have been rejected by political groups supported by neighboring Iran. Under an unofficial agreement dating back to the 2003 U.S.-led invasion, Iraq's presidency, a largely ceremonial role, is held by a Kurd, while the prime minister is Shiite and the parliament speaker is Sunni. West Africa's regional bloc maintains sanctions against Mali and calls to stage elections within 12 to 16 months. The president of the Economic Community of West African States said the 15-nation bloc is pushing for Mali's military, which seized power in 2020, to have elections within 12 to 16 months. The bloc will also maintain sanctions on Mali over the military rulers of the Sahel country, delaying a return to civilian rule after a coup. These decisions were informed at the ECOWAS Extraordinary Summit in Ghana after an envoy from Mali traveled to Bamako, but the talks on restoring civilians' rule were inconclusive. Mali's junta views the sanctions as illegal and vowed to challenge them in international court. The first African elected head of the International Labour Organization, former Togolese Prime Minister Gilbert Ungbo, says he will tackle the social consequences of COVID-19 and develop the universalization of social protection. The 61-year-old former Prime Minister was elected head of the ILO on Friday, succeeding British trade unionist Guy Ryder, who had been on the job for 10 years. The African Union had supported Ungbo over 4 other candidates from France, South Korea, South Africa, and Australia. And Friday, the permanent representative of the United Arab Emirates for United Nations, Lana Nusseibeh, along with other foreign ministers, deplored the Taliban decision to ban girls from attending secondary schools in Afghanistan.
Our message today is clear. All girls in Afghanistan should be able to get to school. This week, more than 1 million Afghan girls were getting ready to finally be able to return to school. Their hopes were dashed at the last minute, at the school gates, when they learned that their right to an education will continue to be denied through an arbitrary decision. The decision is a reversal of the commitments the Taliban themselves have made in recent weeks and months as part of the ongoing engagement with the international community. It is a profoundly disturbing setback.
In the South African city of Cape Town, the water supply is still an unresolved issue. 4 years ago, the city faced the most severe drought in its history, and the Thewoudeskloof Dam was dry. Today, city water stocks are close to their maximum capacity, but the city's biggest and poorest township, Khayelitsha, water is still a scarce commodity. The only water points are the one attached to toilets built by the city. Local authorities said it's simply too difficult to keep up with the influx due to the exponential increase of informal settlements made by people coming from the countryside searching for better living conditions.
It is actually worse. It is worse now because we knew at that time that we're sitting with a problem here, with a water problem. But it is actually worse than that because we do have water and we know that. We do have water, but it happens worse than it happened when there was a drought.
According to China Earthquake Network Center, CENC, a 6.0 magnitude earthquake jolted the city of Delinga in northwest China's Qinghai province at 12:21 p.m. Saturday Beijing time. The CENC reported that the epicenter was monitored at 38.5 degrees north latitude and 97.33 degrees east longitude with a depth of 10 kilometers. Tremors were also felt in the cities of Yushuan, Yangyuan, and Xiangye in neighboring Gansu province. There were no immediate reports of casualties or damage. Firefighters in multiple places of Qinghai and Guangzhou were mobilized and were ready for potential rescue efforts. The fire brigade in Haixi Prefecture, where the earthquake occurred, has assembled 100 firefighters, 18 vehicles, and nearly 6,500 sets of rescue equipment in preparation for the rescue efforts. In the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., dozens of United States youth joined on Friday to protest outside the White House and marched in as a part of a global climate strike demanding action to stop global warming.
I'm here mostly. I think climate change is a very important issue that we need to take more seriously as a society. Personally, also coming from the Black community, I think environmental racism is something that we need to address more. And like my sign says, people over profit.
change is something that I'm super passionate about, and you know, I believe that we all deserve to have a livable future where we can live, you know, with nature. And I think what we're doing here is super important, building community, fighting for what we believe in, and yeah.
We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at teleSUR English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.